nobody wants to take responsibility, right? And it's not like I'm saying as a family member, you're responsible for, because I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying you're responsible for yourself and your own actions. And it's through looking at that, through looking at yourself and how you can start to change, that you're really going to have the greatest impact on your loved one and their recovery.
You're listening to the Recovered Life Show, the show that helps people in recovery live their best recovered lives. And here is your host, Damon Frank.
Welcome back to the Recovered Life Show. I am joined again today by Dr. K.J. Foster. She is the founder of Fostering Resilience. How you doing today, Dr. K.J.?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad to have you on. This episode's going to be really interesting. We're talking about the role of your family in recovery. And you are the expert on that, have written books and have a whole practice about the family. And we're hoping you can give us a little bit of guidance about what is the family's role in recovery.
I will do my best. The family's role is a significant role. And so that's the number one thing to understand, is that you can have a huge influence on your loved one's recovery. A lot of people that I meet, that I work with, whose loved ones are in treatment, they come into treatment and they ask the question, what can I do? What can I do to help? And what they're very often surprised to hear is that the number one thing that they can do to help their loved one is to help themselves, is to focus on their own recovery, is to really accept the fact that they too are in recovery. That the addiction, the substance use has impacted them in ways in which a lot of the times they're not even aware, because a lot of times it happens slowly over time, and it's very subtle that the family members aren't even aware of the way in which they've been impacted and the changes in their own behavior that have resulted from their loved one's addiction. So that's first and foremost, is focus on yourself, engage in your own recovery process, your own recovery program, because that is really the best thing that you can do to support your loved one.
Dr. KJ, would you say that most people, most families that have a loved one that enters recovery really are unaware of that? So they really, my experience is seeing families go through the recovery process with a loved one. Most family members either come in confused or incredibly angry,
right?
Really, or incredibly worried and kind of what I would call codependent, right? That they're going to take on and fight this fight for the person that is going through recovery. Do you think the awareness is there for most people, most families that are going through this process?
No, especially people that are new to the process, right? That this is something that has come to the forefront, that their loved one is really struggling with this addiction, and they come into treatment and they're really uneducated to begin with, right? Because as much as we've evolved in terms of our understanding of addiction and how it impacts the brain and the important aspects of recovery, family members still come in and have these old ideas about addiction and what it means, and they don't understand how it really happens and the impact to the brain. So one of the first things that I think is important for family members and helpful to family members is to become educated, to receive education about addiction as a disease and as a mental illness, because that's truly what it is the way in which the substances have impact the brain, and then the resulting mental illness that occurs as a result of the impact to the brain. And then also that hope of full recovery, that this doesn't have to be who their loved one is, forevermore. And a lot of people think in those terms, like, oh, my loved one is addicted, they're an addict, they're an alcoholic, and this is like a, forever sentence, so to speak. And that's not my view at all. That hasn't been my experience. I'm someone who has experienced an addiction myself. I have a loved one. My husband's gone through it. And we also have a son who experienced an addiction to drugs. And I emphasize the word experience. It was an experience. It was an illness that we experienced and that we have fully recovered from. And there is that, I think that piece that people forget is that not only can you recover from an addiction, and it doesn't have to be this lifelong, long struggle, but you can really become better as a result of going through that experience. I've become, far better than I ever was before, and my son and my husband as well. So, giving that hope that this doesn't have to be this, ongoing horrible thing, yet at the same time, and this is a piece where some people don't like to talk about this, but I definitely like to put it out there and talk about it because it's a reality of the experience, is that this is a chronically relapsing disorder. This is something that is very, very difficult to recover from because of the ingrained neuropathways and the impact to the brain, and it takes a lot of work. And so the family members being able, and the individual themselves being able to be more gentle and compassionate and understanding when their loved one relapses, because it's really hard, rather than coming from that place of anger and disappointment that only serves to feed the addiction and actually make it stronger rather than helping the person. And that's something, family members think, I need to be harsh with my loved one. I need to, and there's a difference between setting healthy boundaries and being harsh and critical and angry and condemning and judgmental, because all of those attitudes only serve to make the addiction stronger when we treat the individual that way.
Yeah. And I think a lot of, I have noticed that there's kind of two paths that happen. The person who is going through the immediate recovery and has identified that there's some sort of problem. Maybe they haven't even identified that there's some sort of problem. Their family's identified it, and they're now willing to kind of look at it or go through some sort of treatment or recovery process. And then there's the family's path. And I usually see at the very beginning of that, there's a big question. What does this mean? And they're kind of filling in the story. Does this mean I was a bad mom, a bad dad, a bad uncle, a bad brother, a bad sister, right? This defining of it. And what does this mean for next Christmas? Does this mean that we can't have cocktails? Do we need to not go to the baseball game anymore, right? Like all of this stuff that really does not matter ends up coming up to the forefront. And I've seen a lot, which is very interesting, if you're the first person in the family to get into recovery and to get sober, and there's other practicing addicts in the family, this triggers a lot of very intense emotions.
Yes, absolutely. And what will commonly happen, and not to be surprised by this, what will commonly happen is when that one person in the family starts to recover, other people in the family may get worse before they get better, because there's this resistance to, I don't really know what it is in terms of the trigger in the brain, but I know that in my experience, my son absolutely got worse as I got better. And I've heard that is a common experience with families where there's, several people, if not a couple of people, who are experiencing substance abuse, maybe not. And that's another thing too, is that defining line that's so hard to determine. And it's such a personal determination of, when does substance abuse cross over into addiction? When does it become this experience where you really have to change almost your entire, you absolutely have to change your entire lifestyle in order to support the recovery process. And that, I think, is really challenging, especially if you're in a family where there are other people who are, who drink on a regular basis or use other drugs on a regular basis, and you're in that environment. It makes it really, really difficult. I can tell you from my own experience, I am from a large Irish Catholic family where everybody drinks, and it's a culture. It's like a part of the ingrained culture of my family that that's what people do. It's also an ingrained culture in my family that people work really hard, and they work hard and they play hard, and most people can balance that for a period of time. But when I first started to recover, one of the biggest challenges for me was, feeling like an outsider within my own family, because, everybody else, their life just moves on. They're like, I'm not going to, stop drinking. And that's an expectation too, that I think is important to clarify is the expectation of, if I'm not living in the same household with someone, right? For me to have this expectation because I'm recovering and I'm not drinking, that everybody else around me should, modify their life to accommodate me, is unrealistic. And it's not fair to like other people, right? So if I'm living in a household where people are actively drinking and using drugs, then that's something that is definitely an issue and a challenge. And probably one of the things, the most difficult challenges I see within families, like spouses and family members, where one person is in treatment and they're going back into an environment where their spouse or other people within the household are actively, drinking and or using drugs. And that, is a huge challenge for a lot of people.
I've noticed that it's almost like a series of dominoes. When someone in a family goes into recovery, all of a sudden every domino starts to go down. Right. So you'll have family members, make claims. It's like, well, they didn't get that alcoholism from me. Right. I'm just, I can control my drinking, right? And then there's always this kind of infighting, it seems, with most people about things that really don't matter. Right. And then I call it the born again syndrome with people who are in recovery, people that get it right away and realize the solution, are going around trying to kind of baptize everybody else into it in the family. Right. It's not, then they're not really ready for it. And and they're doing it at really inappropriate times, like Christmas Eve or a New Year's party, or someplace that it's just really not appropriate to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've absolutely observed that over the years with some people. And whenever, and recovery doesn't work that way. Any time that you're trying to impose, what you want somebody else to do or what you believe they should, do, is going to create resistance within that person. And the other flip side that I was thinking of as you were talking about that, and all of these different experiences and, the way in which family members respond to things, is that family members often will feel like they might catch it, so to speak, right? Like, oh, I have to stay away from that person because I don't want to, get that, what they have, or they're overly cautious around the person, saying, are you okay? Or, or hiding things, or just behaving in ways that makes it very uncomfortable for the person who's trying to recover. It's not about, of course you don't necessarily, when somebody's brand new to recovery, you don't want to be sitting there drinking, a cocktail in front of them, or anything like that, if it's not necessary. There's family events where you can't necessarally control what, and this is where you don't dictate, you don't say, oh, well, everybody shouldn't drink because I'm going to be at the party and, and I'm recovering. that there are ways and recommendations that we make to help people get through situations like that with their family members. But family members they'll start to act weird, like, oh, let me hide this cocktail because if this person sees that I'm drinking, they might, they walk on eggshells around people that makes it even more uncomfortable for the individual who's like, as if they, like I said, as if they have the plague or they have something that, could be caught by other people rather than just being supportive. But this is where education comes into play. And it's so, I think, critical for family members to know how to behave and how to, and what to expect, what to expect in terms of how that person is going to, some of the symptoms that they're going to experience of the post-acute withdrawals. And I think probably one of the biggest struggles or the most common mistakes, I should say, that people fall into is this belief that recovery happens quickly and that my loved one is going to treatment for 28 days. And I've heard family members say this, right? They'll say, well, they better be fixed when they come home, this better be cured, or this, they better be good, fix them. You're going to fix them, right, in 28 days. And treatment is not recovery, it's treatment. And it's like going into the hospital and getting treated for an illness or having a surgery. You come out, I always use the analogy of a knee replacement, just because I have a lot of family members who have had knee replacements, my mom, my dad. And so when you go in and you have some sort of surgical procedure, or you get treated for something, you come out of the hospital and there's a cast, or there's like the little knee stroller things that people go around on. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but when you have knee surgery, there's something, whether it's crutches or a wheelchair or a little, the knee scooter, there's something that indicates to people that you are rehabilitating from an injury, right? So, my dad had to go to physical therapy for almost a year for his knee to be able to get back to 100%, where he could go out and be, physically active. And addiction impacts the brain significantly. Yet people have this belief that my loved one's going to go to treatment for 28 days and they're going to come home and they're going to be good. And it's like, and that's not the case. That it's the beginning of the rehabilitation process. And then they're going to need to go to physical therapy, so to speak. They're going to need to go to meetings and participate in a recovery process that is going to help them to rehabilitate. And their brain's going to be healing. And as their brain heals, they're going to experience symptoms that's going to kind of mimic maybe their behavior when they were in active addiction, which is scary, right? Oh, did my loved one relapse because they're acting very strange? They're moody and they're not usually moody. And these post-acute withdrawal symptoms are normal. They're natural, and they're actually good because it's a signal that your brain is healing. And so family members need to know this information and know that this is a journey that takes a long time to fully rehabilitate. And on average takes about 18 months. I don't think anyone gets by, so to speak. Anyone recovers any quicker than a minimum of like a year for the brain to really heal. And of course, it's all based upon types of drugs, length of time that they used the substance, and underlying health factors as well. So, family members being supportive of that and encouraging of that. I tell family members to imagine their loved one with a bandage around their head, like for the next year, because that's what's happening. Their brain is rehabilitating. And I think the reason why a lot of people fail at recovery is because they don't give themselves enough time. They don't give their brain enough time to heal.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of people on the show that are involved with recovery houses, and they'll be the first to say that it's not a you come here and we fix you situation. And in most cases, it's just a timeout and a detox. It's just a timeout.
Oh, yeah.
It's gotten so out of control that you can't really enter the recovery process on your own. So we're going to give you a timeout. We're going to medically make sure that you're okay so that you can then go work on your recovery if you choose to do that.
Right. And there are so many people who just, go to detox over and over and over again. And they use it like a drying out period. Oh, I'm just going to give my body a break for a little bit and get back to what they think is baseline when they're not even close. They physically, and this is where people, just fall back into denial or refuse to, believe the truth, which is just because you're physically feeling better in the moment, you've gotten through that detox, your body's feeling good. It's a false sense of security. And it's, if we could only see the impact to the brain, which is why I know that there are treatment centers now who do brain scans and that literally show people like, this is the impact to your brain. This is what your brain looks like, because we can't see it. And so it's natural when we feel better and we look in the mirror and it's like, oh, I'm good. I look good. I'm feeling good, to think we can just go right back to, doing what we were doing and ignoring the fact that we're continuing to harm ourselves within the brain.
You have such an expertise at working with families that are going through this process. What would you say about codependency in the number of cases that you see of people that are going into recovery, their families having serious codependent issues? Do you think that is a common thread in most experiences?
Oh, yes. Yes. And what happens with codependency is just so similar to the substance use disorder experience in terms of the progression, the way it can progress. We can start out by being mildly codependent, and as our loved one continues to struggle and they get worse, oftentimes family members will get worse and they'll progress in their own symptoms, to the extent that family members themselves can develop mental illnesses, eating disorders, their own substance use disorders as a result of their own codependency. And another element of that is very, characteristic. It's a characteristic that really mimics the characteristic of substance use disorder, is the denial. Because I've worked with family members who are so codependent, and they'll sit there and they'll say, I'm not codependent. I'm not, they don't have any awareness of it at all. And part of it is because they don't understand what codependency is. And they get stuck on the dependent part of the word. They're like, I'm not dependent, so I'm not a codependent. Whereas they don't understand that, codependency, I think of my own codependency because that was my first addiction, and it's a behavior addiction. You get, stuck in these patterns of behavior and ways in which you're responding to your loved one and their addiction, and you get like obsessed with and then addicted to managing their illness and managing even their recovery. And people who experience substance use disorders themselves are often very codependent in their own behavior. So you've got like a dual addiction going on. So codependency, people who are codependent are actually some of the like strongest people that I've ever met, because they're taking on the world, and what happens as a result of that is they're denying their own needs. So, and it can happen so slowly over time, where it's like, I'm helping, I'm doing, I'm managing. and then slowly I'm not taking care of me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing, the things that I used to do for self-care. I'm not doing anything that we lose ourselves completely in the, attempt to try and help our loved ones. And it's so hard to, turn the ship around, so to speak, like to turn people around and say, okay, listen, the best thing that you can do for yourself and your loved one is to start to take care of you, like to start to get back to that self-care and allow your loved one to be responsible for themselves and their own recovery. And when you're, it's all about the patterns of behavior and the neural pathways. When you've been doing that for, a long time, years and years for some people, it's really hard, not impossible, but it's difficult to start to change and those patterns of behavior. And that was, for me, learning how to address my codependency and start to heal my codependency, I think was instrumental in my son being able to recover. I think that if I hadn't let go of the need to control and manage and help him in ways that were hurting, that he may not have made it. He may not have recovered. So that's what I mean by family members have a lot of influence, and our own, and, family members, sometimes it's just really difficult to look at ourselves because it's, the egregious, so to speak, behavior is generally coming from the addicted person. So family member, nobody wants to take responsibility, right? And it's not like I'm saying as a family member, you're responsible for, because I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying you're responsible for yourself and your own actions. And it's through looking at that, through looking at yourself and how you can start to change, that you're really going to have the greatest impact on your loved one and their recovery. So I think I'm talking in circles, but
yeah. Well, Dr. KJ, if there are families, just in conclusion here, if there are families that are listening to this, if there are people that are listening to this and they have a family member that's in recovery and they're struggling right now and they think that it's just, their life is just a mess, they feel that this is never going to get better, what would be something that you could give them, a suggestion that you could give them, or a ray of hope that things can get better and will get better?
Yeah. Well, there are three things that I recommend to family members. And number one is to seek your own support, your own recovery, accepting the fact that you need recovery. And it's just as important for you to get your own recovery as a family member as it is for your loved one. And so you need that support, you need guidance, you need somebody who is going to help to guide you and give you information and help you to look at some patterns of behavior that may be hurting rather than helping. And then finally, it's the practicing of spiritual principles, which people get kind of stuck in, equating that with religion. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. Although for some people, religion is a way in which they practice spiritual principles that gives them strength, that gives them power. So I would say the number one spiritual principle is self-compassion, because the more that you are able to be compassionate towards yourself and loving towards yourself and, practicing self-care and taking care of yourself and getting stronger within yourself, then that is going to put you in a position to be able to offer that to your loved one and to everyone else around you too. So it's about you being in a place of strength so that no matter what happens, you're going to be able to handle that. So it's not about like, absolutely there are millions of people who have not only recovered, but are living their best lives, living lives that are better than they would have been had they not experienced the addiction. And the truth. I mean, nobody wishes, addiction upon themselves or anybody else for that matter. But the truth is that it's, in my experience and in others that I've worked with, it's given me strength and the ability to help others, and, had positive effects on my life that I never could have imagined. So,
I mean, really, this is really a great opportunity to make your family stronger.
Yes,
really,
absolutely.
at the end of the day, right? This could be the path to actually make things better. My experience with families that have gone through this process is that if people actually work it and have some sort of effort, the bonds and the family structure is just so much better at the end of this process.
Yeah. And learning how to go from anger to compassion.
Exactly.
Learning how to get out of that negative mindset and start to focus on recovery and a life in recovery, rather than focusing on, I think we have a tendency when we're in the midst of that despair and that hopelessness, is to get stuck, and that's why it's so important to have a support group and other people that can give you that strength until you're able to start to cultivate that strength on your own.
So Dr. KJ, where can you have a lot of resources? Where can they find out more about how families can help themselves, codependency, addiction? Where can they find out more about you?
Well, they can go to my website, which is, there are two ways to get there. It's drkjfoster.org, which is drkjfoster.org. Then there's FR program for fostering resilience, frprogram.com. So that will take you to my website, which provides free recovery support meetings, free family training videos. I have a YouTube channel called Fostering Resilience that provides educational resources, meditations, because mindfulness meditation is huge in terms of being able to build your recovery strength, your prefrontal cortex, and then also free recovery support meetings, which are open to both individuals and family members every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year via Zoom. And then I'm going to be launching an app in about a month that is going to bring all of that to you in the palm of your hand. So
if you're a family listening to this and you need help, there are some great resources right there for you. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Keep the conversation going. Join Recovered Life, a community of like-minded people who are looking to live their best recovered lives. Membership is free, and you can apply at recoveredlife.us.